She's April.
And she's Molly.
And we are
the Book Besties.
What happened to the people on the ships?
They don't even go by their names anymore.
We have to save the Shakespeare.
Going to be the divide between a before and an after.
After a couple of weeks, it's like, I think it's precedented now. Like, I think we're good.
That's how the original fairy tales, they're really dark. Like, they're not Disney. Hi!
Hello! My goodness!
So, everybody, Molly is still sick, but I have the absolute privilege of having our special guest host today, author Francesca Zappia, which is just amazing. Back for your second time.
My second time. I'm so excited.
I know. I'm so excited too. I have to fangirl a little bit because I love your book so much, and like for me, like I can't stop talking about the fact that you're coming on the pod, and it's just exciting for me. It's like we're just this little pod, but we love hanging out with you. So
I love hanging out with you guys. I get to talk about one of my favorite books of all time. I get to talk about books in general, which I don't get to do that often, despite being an author. I'm just so happy to be here.
Yeah, and you're wearing your honorary Book Besties t-shirt.
Anybody watching the video, you will be able to see it. It's gray with white lettering, but it's my honorary Book Bestie t-shirt.
Yes, we love it. Molly refers to you as our bestie Chessie. So
Bestie Chessie.
But yeah, so I love that you wanted to come on and talk about a book that you love, because like to me that like I love that we got to talk about your book, but the fact that you wanted to come back and talk about other books, like that to me is really special, because it's like you're not coming on here to promote yourself. I mean, sure, we're definitely going to talk about your new book that I've already pre-ordered, but you're coming on because you love books, and that's why Molly and I started this podcast, because we love books. So
yes. Yeah. Like I said, I'm just so excited. I really, when I love a book as much as I love this one, one of those things where I get to talk to somebody else who has read it and who also really enjoys it. It's like, get into like the nitty gritty of it and like talk all the things that make it so special. And like, it just makes me so excited.
It's basically my job, right? So I'm a librarian. So like that's what I do, is talk to people about books all day long. But because I'm a children's librarian, I really don't often get to talk about books that are grown-up books.
Yes.
And this one is. Although recently I run a teen program twice a month, and I do like book talks with the kids just to showcase our collection. And I like to showcase the new books, and so we still have on our new bookshelf Cats and Yammer. So I showcased that and said, and this is another book by her, Eliza and Her Monsters, and this is one of my favorite books. So it was really great. So
that's awesome.
Yay. And Eliza and Her Monsters is still a quote on my office like wall. Like there's a monster in my brain that controls my doubt. That's my jam right there. I love it. So speaking of your writing, so tell us about what you've got coming out next year.
Yes. So next year in March of 2023, I have a book coming out called Grey Mist Fair. And if whoever's watching this, you'll be able to see the cover. I have my advanced copies here. It is a beautiful fantasy book. It's so it is a retelling of Grimm's fairy tales, lesser known Grimm's fairy tales, kind of put together in like an anthology format. But all the stories together tell an overarching story about this magical village in the woods.
Nice.
And the people who live there. And it's a story that I worked on for, I think, probably 10 years. I think 10 years ago is when I originally came up with the idea, and it just took a long time to come to fruition.
Yeah.
But I really
are there illustrations in there that you've done as like you do for some of your other books?
Yeah. So this one, it's not going to have like full page illustrations the way that Eliza and Cats and Yammer did, but it does have, it will have spot art on the chapter headers the way that like Adamsville had some spot art, and Made You Up had spot art on the chapter header. Right. So it's going to have some of that kind of stuff in it.
I love that. Yeah, so I've pre-ordered my copy. We'll put a link below to Chessie's website so you can pre-order a copy. And is it up on your website now that they can pre-order?
Yes, okay. There are links on my website. Perfect. You just go to the book page. In fact, it's the landing page of the website. So
wonderful.
Just go straight there.
Wonderful. So we'll do that. We'll put that there. So pre-order that book. It comes out in March, correct?
Yes, March 28th, 2023.
Awesome. I'm very excited. It also, the cover gives me spooky vibes.
It's a little spooky.
A little spooky. I loved reading Grimm's fairy tales when I was like middle school. I went through this phase where I was like, I'm going to be like super dark and angsty. And people don't like always realize that like that's how the original fairy tales, they're really dark. Like they're not Disney.
No. Go ahead.
So I went through this whole, like, I'm going to read Poe and I'm going to read, the middle schooler angst.
I got you. I was there. I went through that too. There's one of my favorite stories that I used for Grey Mist Fair, because I have an anthology of like all their complete collection, and I went through and I was like, which ones of these would be interesting in some way to put together in a book? And one of them was Clever Hans, which I don't know if you've read that one, but it is gnarly. Like,
maybe
I'm talking about like,
I'm not sure. I don't remember now.
I'm talking like cow eyeballs getting thrown at a young girl. It's wild. It is weird. And like, it is like dark comedy almost. There are no eyeballs that get thrown at anybody in Grey Mist Fair.
Good to know.
None of that. It's not that dark. It does not get near Katzenjammer levels of anything. So,
yeah. Yeah, Katzenjammer really is dark.
Katzenjammer is dark. Grey Mist Fair is more like spooky. Original Grimm's fairy tales. Spooky. It's atmospheric.
Yeah. Well, I love that. I think that's going to be great. So let's talk about what we're here to talk about. Before we do that, are you still working on the piano story that you were working on before?
Yeah, I am still, it is still there. My agent actually asked me about it. She was like, where are you with that one? And I was like, it's around. I'm still figuring out what to do with it.
I was loving following your updates on Instagram. So Molly runs our TikTok and I run our Instagram. And so I know you're posting from TikTok, but I was loving like watching them. And then I was like, when is this going to happen? I need to read this book. It sounds so good. I need it. I need it in my life.
Well, it has happened again where I'm like, I need to rewrite this story. Like, it's going to be better. I need to rewrite it. So I rewrite it. I get like 25,000 words into it. And then I'm like, my last draft was better than all of this. I should just go back and fix the last draft instead of trying to rewrite the entire thing.
That's fair.
So the book is written. It's just, I need to go back and revisit it and edit it more and everything. So hopefully it will... This is what happens. See, like Grey Mist Fair is like 10 years ago I started it.
Right.
I just never talked about it, so nobody ever knew that it was a thing that you could have.
Right.
And now it's like, now that I've talked about it, people are like seeing the entire length of the process.
Yeah.
So the piano book has been going for a while too. So I think it should be soon.
Okay, I'm going to hold you to that. But today, you're actually going to be our guest host. You're going to host, and I'm just going to sit back and enjoy the ride. And we are going to talk about this book, Station 11 by Emily St. John Mandel. And so if you're confused, no, Chessie did not write this book.
I did not write this, sadly. I wish I had.
I wish I'd written this book. Chessie loves this book. I love this book. It's just it's one that stays with you. Like I feel like that, like has stayed with me because I read it when it first came out. The library system where I worked in Ohio, we had a one city, one book. And this is the book we did. And even though I was on staff, could not get tickets to go in and see her speak, which was like so disappointing.
It was wild.
Yeah, crazy. I mean, everything was packed. It was packed. So I read this long before it was an HBO series, long before we went through a pandemic, and I know you did as well. So we have different feelings about it. So
Well, go ahead.
No, go ahead. Sorry.
I was just going to say, I read this. I first read this. I think it had just come out on paperback because it was on the like buy two get the third 50% off table paperbacks at Barnes and Noble.
Yeah.
And I had seen it a couple times and like I hadn't heard anything about it at that point. And then I read it and I was like, why is no one talking about this?
Why is nobody talking about this book? Right.
Yeah. And then, of course, everybody did. So I was like, good, you should. Everyone should.
Yeah. Well, actually, I said that I had read it when it first came out, but I just looked and it came out in 2014, and I definitely read it in 2015. So I must have read it a year later. But I read it on Kindle. At the time, I was like momming. So like the Kindle was life for me. And so I'm sad that Molly isn't here because she did the audiobook, and like I haven't listened to the audiobook, so I don't know how the narrator is, but I love like hearing that. But so I read the Kindle version, and then I bought the paperback for this episode and read it as well. And there's something about like holding this book, like it's like
there really is.
It felt different, yeah.
It's so strange how different like holding it is, and just being able to. We'll get into it. There's so many things about this book that I love.
So, do you want to start us off with a synopsis?
Yes, I will start us with a synopsis. Let me bring this up here. All right, here we go. Station 11 tells the story of the end of the world due to a pandemic flu and what becomes of humanity 20 years afterward. The book is made up of many interweaving points of view, but the two central characters that drive the story are Arthur Leander, a megastar actor in the world before, and Kirsten Raymond, an actress with the Traveling Symphony who largely only remembers her life growing up in the world after. After an encounter with the sinister Prophet on their route, the Symphony and Kirsten find themselves in a bad situation started decades in the past. The Prophet believes that the world can and will be returned to the way it was, and has convinced his followers of the same. As the story unfolds, we find out that the Prophet is Arthur Leander's son. A final confrontation between Kirsten and the Prophet happens outside the Severn City Airport, which is now known as the Museum of Civilization. The Prophet is killed by one of his own, and Kirsten and the Symphony arrive safely at their destination. So I wrote that out. I hope people know that it's spoilers, because
listen, we always do spoilers here. If you didn't read the book, you shouldn't be here.
Also, I feel like this is one of those stories that kind of is bigger than its spoilers.
Oh, yeah.
It's about the process of reading it and the thoughts that you have while you're reading it. It's not about the spoilers.
Yeah. Well, and I kind of figured out a lot of the spoilers like halfway through. Like my first reading. So I didn't figure out that the Prophet would be killed by one of his own, but like I was like, oh, this is 100% Arthur Leander's son. Like this is Tyler. This is him. Yeah. And I figured that out in my first reading very early on. But still, the way the story weaves together, that's the brilliance of this book. It's not the spoilers. It's
not the spoilers. Yeah. And that's like, I think that is the mark of like a really good story, is when you can guess the twists or the spoilers or whatever, because the book sets up your expectations so well and puts all the pieces together so well, but you still... you are glad because your expectations were met, but also you still want to see how it all unfolds.
Right. 100%. I totally agree. And and this book is just, it's really well written. Like I have read really crappy books that I've still loved. And we use this example all the time on this show, but Twilight is poorly written. It is poorly written, but I love it so much. This book is just really like, it's so carefully crafted. It's like a masterclass in writing. As a former English teacher and now a librarian, this is like the kind of stuff that you point to where you're like, this is how you weave a story.
Yes. And I was thinking about this earlier because with pretty much all books, I'm super critical. And like most books, even if I love them deeply, I can still, no book is perfect. I can still find some things that I'm like, that could have been done better or whatever. And I've read all of her books, and with those, I'm like, I enjoy them, but I'm like, the pacing was a little off here, or this was weird, or whatever. This, I cannot think of any complaints that I have with this book.
No. This is actually the only one I've read by her, but I feel the same way. Like, I'm like, there's nothing that I'm like,
It's like, it's just good. It's just good.
It's solid.
So, yeah. And also, this book was very hard for me to synopsize because of the way it kind of encapsulates one of my favorite quotes of all time.
Yeah.
Which I'll go ahead and read right now just so we get it out of the way. But so it's from Slaughterhouse-Five by Vonnegut. And it goes, they're talking about the aliens in Slaughterhouse-Five and how they see art or how they form their art. And it goes... There isn't any particular relationship between all the messages, except that the author has chosen them carefully so that, when seen all at once, they produce an image of life that is beautiful and surprising and deep. So like, obviously this is not perfect toward this. Like there are messages, there are relationships between all the messages, but like this book is something that it's like, it is when you see it as a whole that it is like, you finish the book and I just have to sit there and like, just contemplate the world and my life for a while. And it's like, wow, all of that just really hit me hard.
Yeah. It's definitely a book that you have to sit with. You really do.
Oh, yeah.
Like after you're done, you have to like sit there for a moment and you're like, okay.
Yeah.
And I know this is one of your questions, but it feels different reading it now, having lived through a pandemic.
Yeah. Let's start with that. Let's start with that because one of my questions was, if this wasn't your first time reading the book, did you first read it pre-pandemic, which we both did? What's the difference in experience reading this book pre and post-pandemic?
Yeah. So Molly doesn't remember the first time she read it, which to me is like, how do you forget this book? But I have a different feeling now because when I read it the first time, I think I was more afraid, like, oh shit, this could really kill 95% of the population. Like, and when I talk about this on the pod a lot, I have an anxiety disorder. And when you have an anxiety disorder, something like a pandemic, not fun. Just hands down, not where your brain wants to be. So having read this before, I was like, yes, this could definitely happen. But to be honest with you, reading it this time, I felt more hopeful because what happened in this book was not what happened with COVID.
Yes.
Like this book killed 95% of the population at the drop of a hat. People were dying within hours of contracting their flu. I can't remember what their flu
was. The Georgia flu.
Thank you. The Georgia flu. And so they were dying within hours of contracting it. And that wasn't happening with COVID. And additionally, people were, coming together to try to stop the spread of COVID. So libraries were closing, which was like really hard for me, not because it's my job and I was worried about my job, but because libraries are like one of the last place, they are the last place you can be without any expectations to buy anything.
Yes.
It's a safe space for a lot of people. Schools were closing, safe space for a lot of people. So for me, that doing those things was initially scary, but I was like, but we're going to make this better. We're going to prevent this from turning into what happens in this book. And so reading it this time, I felt, this is hopeful. Like we could experience a flu and we could overcome it.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly. I think it was similar for me. I remember the first time I read it, I at the time, I had known about the whole thing of like, oh, we experience like a major pandemic every 100 years or so, whatever. And I had heard people saying like, oh, we're due for another one and everything. And it was, reading it the first time was definitely like scarier and like, oh my God, what if this really happened?
What if this really happened? Yeah.
What if this really happened? And then COVID happens and then you read it again and it's like, COVID was bad. And it's like, it wasn't as bad as this. And even then in reading this, it kind of reminds you that like, if something this bad happened, it would be sad. You would feel loss. You would grieve, assuming you didn't die, assuming you were still alive whatever. But there would still be things to be happy about and to care about. And, and we can look back on the way things were and say, wow, what a time when we could, we could go to the airports without wondering, like, is somebody here going to give me a pandemic?
Right.
Like, am I going to contract something? A time before I went to whatever crowded place and wondered, am I about to touch something that somebody else touched and they were super sick?
Right.
So there is definitely a difference reading this pre and post pandemic.
For sure.
But also another thing I noticed about reading it post pandemic is that like now that we've lived through a pandemic, it's like I almost wondered if this would feel cheap or off, like because now I've experienced the real thing, and it still didn't. It was solid. It was like if this situation happened, it was like, yeah, you would get the run on the grocery stores. You would get the people knocking on apartments and looters and rioting and all that stuff.
And it did make me question more on this reading because, you know, COVID was predicted to be arguably a lot more deadly than it ended up being. And that is not to say to downplay COVID at all. Right. It was certainly deadly, and we did lose a lot of people to COVID. But had we not done the things that we did, masking, slow spread, stay home, those kind of things, it could have been a lot worse. When I was reading this, I kept coming up with questions like, what really would be the end of civilization if a flu did decimate the population? So I actually asked our friend Nurse Katie, who she is a nurse practitioner. She works with cancer patients. That's her specialty. But what she said the end would actually be would not be so much the flu as it would be the collapse of civilization. So the fighting for resources, there would most definitely be a famine and lack of probably clean water. And those things would kill people more quickly, the survivors more quickly, because we would have a lack of resources. And that's what actually happens in this book. Like, you know, they lose everything. They lose power. And the book, most of the book takes place 20 years after the flu, and they still don't have electricity. And so I think my first time reading it, I was going like, why didn't they just find somebody to fix the electricity? And this time I was going, okay, because there really legitly were not people to do that. Like, they just weren't there.
Yeah. The infrastructure just crumbles.
Right. Right.
Yeah. And something like to that point, most of the story takes place either pre the pandemic or 20 years post. The one part that does take place like during the early days is Jeevan's part. Right. And the parts where I remember the first time I read this, the parts where he's in the apartment with his brother are so, there's the one part where there's somebody, like, he barricades the door, and then somebody's like banging on the door trying to get in, and they just go really quiet. That was the scariest part to me, because it's like, you couldn't leave because it would just be people killing each other for resources, like mass panic. He talks about the highway being packed with cars, and seeing people getting out and walking.
And I mean, where would you go? I mean, really, you can't. I mean, I guess the idea would be to leave the big cities where it was going to spread faster. But really, where could you go? Yeah. In this book, the flu went through civilization, the world's population, 95% of the world's population, in like a matter of weeks. Yeah. There was no escaping it.
Yeah, exactly. So, it was
scary.
It was scary. Have you watched the HBO series?
All right, so I had intended to reread this book so I could watch the HBO series, and had not, and then, you know, obviously reread it for this episode. So I was like, I'm going to watch it to prepare. I watched an episode and a half before I quit. Really? I don't know what they did to convince her to let them change so much, but it was so incredibly different. I couldn't handle it.
Okay, so I have not watched any of it. What did they change?
So first of all, Kirsten goes back to Jeevan's house to the apartment with him and his brother. Her parents die. There's no big brother that like cares for her, which is like such an integral part of like her story, like how she was raised by him until he died, like how they walked. That doesn't happen. And I didn't get far enough into it to find out how she separates from Jeevan, because she does. But he when he runs up on the stage to like save Arthur, he doesn't know how to do CPR.
Oh, he's not a paramedic?
He's not a paramedic.
That's a huge part of his story.
A huge part of it. Which, like, right off the bat, I'm texting my friend Megan, who also loves this book, and had already seen the series. And I'm like, what the fuck is this? Like, what is happening? I was so angry about it. And like the halfway through, is it the first episode or is it the second episode? One of the episodes that I was watching, Kirsten stabs the prophet to kill him. They meet super early. She stabs him and he doesn't actually die, but she thinks he's dead.
Ooh.
And so like one of my favorite things when a book is made into a movie or a show is when the author is involved. because I can always tell it's always so much closer to the text because the author is like, I want you to be careful with what you're doing. And I don't know how involved she was, but like this book is a National Book Award finalist. What did HBO think they were doing? Like the audacity.
I have so many TV adaptation related thoughts on everything, not just this book, but like that makes me feel like somebody was like, we need more action. We need the characters to be more involved with each other. And it's like the beauty of this book is in the vague connections that they have between each other, not the direct connections.
Right.
Like Kirsten, I don't want Kirsten to meet the prophet until the end.
No,
they don't have a personal connection. Their connection is in the decades and the people between them. And oh my God.
And the Station 11 comic book, which
Station 11 comic book, which she then like recites to him at the end like a prayer.
And that happens in like the second episode of the HBO series. He says something from it that she's like, how do you know that quote?
And then they have to call it out and be like, look how obvious it is. Where in the book, it's like, you've been sitting with Station 11 this whole time and you understand it. And okay, well,
and
I won't be watching that.
I wouldn't. I gave up. And I can kind of understand why they wanted to weave Jeevan's story in more because it is disconnected from the book. Although I have a theory about that, and I know you have a question about it, so I'll hold off. Yeah. But I think that's why they were trying to put him in with her at the beginning. But you really miss that relationship between him and his brother. His brother is also not in a wheelchair. He uses a cane. And part of the story... his brother kills himself because he didn't want to be a burden, right? He didn't think he'd survive outside of the apartment anyway. And that's like such a huge part of Jeevan's story. And they don't really have a lot of the story with his friend who's British, who runs the
Clark.
There's not a lot of Clark in there. Well, at least not the first episode.
That might come. I don't know how many episodes there are.
I think there's like 8 or something. But anyway, it was just so bad that I was like, no, I'm not finishing this. I'm not.
So, God, I'm so mad. I'm so mad with
I was too
things lately. Okay, so that's exactly why I didn't watch it. By the way, I was like, I just feel like they're gonna do something to it. And I care about it too much to get angry about it. So let's go ahead to that Jeevan question. So the question is, of all the threads of Arthur's life that come together at the end of the book, Jeevan is the one that dangles separately from the rest.
Right.
What do you think this means? What was the point of Jeevan's story?
So I actually think you don't get the answer to Jeevan. It's left open, but I'm pretty sure that his civilization is the one that has electricity at the end.
Oh, I didn't even consider. Well, I thought, hold on, because okay, so she's up at Severn City, right? Which is like in Michigan, or is that up in Canada? Okay, it's in Michigan. Jeevan is in like South Carolina at the end.
Is he? Because I thought it was just. Hold on. Okay, well, you could be right, and I could be wrong.
Let me see if I can look it up. Where is Jeevan?
We're always getting the information on the fly. I love it.
I know. See, now it's only talking about the TV show.
Well, that's dumb. I just remember that directionally, it was the lights were coming from southwest of where they were.
Yeah.
Or southeast, one of those. And that was directionally where he was. But I could be wrong that he could be more south. And that does make sense because I think there's that whole story of the prophets, people coming through there. But
yes,
I was thinking that his town was the one that had advanced enough to have the power at that point. I think it's interesting because I put this in our notes when I was taking random notes. So Arthur Leander dies moments before the pandemic starts, right? So hours before Jeevan is notified, like, this is a pandemic, like, it's going to be deadly, it's going to be bad. And I had this thought of Kobe Bryant dying in 2020 and how...
Interesting. I had wondered about that thing that you wrote.
Oh, yeah, where I'm just like, Kobe Bryant and Arthur Leander.
I was like, what?
What does that mean?
Keep going, yeah.
So I think a lot of people forget that actually happened the same year that COVID started because it was just a month or two. I think it was just a couple weeks before COVID shutdown started.
Yeah.
And how interesting it is that, like, this story weaves together around a famous person, and how all these people connect to him and how they survived. And Kobe Bryant, also a famous person, died right before our pandemic started. And I just thought that was really interesting. Like, I feel like somebody could trace that story, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
So anyway, but I think Jeevan's character isn't necessary other than to tell you what it was like during the pandemic, because he's the only one that, like, we actually get that story. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I agree with that. Cause definitely, like, you get the, like, as it literally just started, the very close weeks afterwards, and then just a sprinkle of, like, where he was 20 years later. He has a son, he has a wife, he's helping people.
Yeah, he survived and survived better, you know?
Yes. Yeah. And, like, I think it actually, like, I think his story still dovetails with the other character stories and the overall themes of the book. So, like, I'm sure there's more there. Part of the reason why I asked that question was because I was sitting there wondering about it myself. Like, I feel like I don't have a good answer for that.
Yeah.
And maybe 5 years from now, I'll read the book again and, like, it'll come to me. Like, I'll see something different.
Like, I also feel like it's important that he's the unnamed person that rushes the stage, because Clark and Kirsten would love to know who that person was, right? But because of the collapse of civilization, because of the Georgian flu, like, we never find out who that person is. We never find out if they survive the pandemic. I mean, we know because we read the book, but, like, they never know.
And you saying that, there are parts in the book where I think Kirsten specifically talks about, like, wanting to know who someone is, or, you know, who did this, who thought of this, who whatever. And it's like, she'll never know. And it's that mystery of losing our interconnectedness as a world.
Oh, yeah.
And our ability to find each other. And, like, our lives are so different and so mysterious now. And there are some things we will just never know. But we as a reader get to know who that was.
Right. I mean, and we never get a look at outside of the U.S., and particularly just, like, this one part of the U.S., right? Like, it starts in Toronto, and then they basically are in
the Great Lakes region.
Yeah, the Great Lakes area where I'm from and where you live now.
Yeah.
So, so, I mean, like, that's mostly where they stay, but because of how connected our world is now globally, we have access to people around the world. I mean, we have tons of access, but a lot of that has to do with the fact that we have the internet and we have electricity. And without that, they literally don't even know if there are any survivors overseas at all. Like, they have no way of knowing. And Kirsten doesn't even know if her parents actually died or just could never make it back to her. She never knows.
Yeah. She never knows. I think the only outside of the Great Lakes region we get is Miranda, because she dies in Malaysia.
Right, she does.
But it's not like you don't really get to see that area. It is just like you see, like, her hotel and the beach and the ships on the horizon.
And the one ship that no one's onboarded, which is just crazy to me to think about.
The airplane. That, on the first reread, that was the scariest thing in that first reread.
No, yeah, definitely the airplane. But I mean, like, she's talking about how there are ships that she knows there are people on.
The ships never unboarded. Yes. Right. Yeah.
And like, I wonder how long they stayed there, because they could have survived the flu.
Yeah. You know? They could just be on. Oh man, that's part of what I love about this book, is the, like, as a reader getting to wonder, like, what happened to the people on the ships? And it's like, it's not a mystery that I really want answered. Right. But it is like it just gives you that big feeling, like, what happened?
There's more there. That's the feeling you get. And with the plane, there's a plane that flies in and lands at the Severn City Airport, and they never onboard. And it's basically, you know, you come to the conclusion that they all died. And at whatever level of death they were in, there were definitely people on that plane who, when it landed, were alive. And probably trying to get out. And that, to me, that imagery that was created there, she didn't need to describe anything more than, we don't know they just stayed in the plane. They never onboarded. And that's enough to terrify you. Like, literally terrify me.
Yes.
I actually have chills.
Yeah. Like every time I talk about it, I'm just like,
yeah.
It's like, and that's the power of like imagery. She never shows you what's in the plane. They don't look through the windows. You get that scene of Tyler, like Clark finds Tyler standing outside the plane, reading from the Book of Revelations.
Yeah, condemning all of them.
Like, he's like, well, there's dead people in there. We got to say, like, and it's so creepy. It's so like,
right. And I mean, that's what starts Tyler as being, the prophet. It's the beginning of that, right? It's that religious like hierarchy, right? So he feels like he's better because he survived.
Yes.
And probably some of that comes from the privilege in which he was raised, because he's Arthur Leander's son, and his mom was also a famous actress. So he was raised with a lot of privilege. Yes. Well, for 8 years until his parents, the pandemic.
Until everything happened.
But yeah, so he gets a little crazy about like, this is God's way of cleansing the earth. And I mean, it's a little kooky, but like, we still saw that happen with COVID, right?
Right.
We saw that happen in the 80s with the rise of AIDS. Like, this is God's way of cleansing the earth, which like, that's complete nonsense. Like, I go to church every Sunday. That's not what the Bible teaches us. You just need to shut up about that.
Right. It's like, nope, this is your own thing that you're making up right now.
This is not God. So.
Yes, exactly. And it's like, it's that thing that he's doing, that like, I am God's chosen, people who survived. We need to like rebuild the world. Everything's going to happen as it should. And it's just like, wow, it is one of those things of he's fully bought into this, and this is bad. This is bad news bears. Like, it's not the pandemic that causes like you were saying, it's not the pandemic that causes the downfall of civilization.
Right.
It is all the people the survivors who aren't suited for it and can't, come together and work together on it. Right. It is that like, divided we fall kind of thing.
And that was my biggest issue with the story, not with the writing. Like, it's really big, well written, and probably more accurate than what I want to happen. But I want people to come together and want to make things better. Like, we are going to restore power. We are going to work together to have food and resources and things like that. But that's just not how people are. People were literally hoarding toilet paper in 2020, right?
Yes.
Like, that was a thing. So, I mean, this is what would happen. Our civilization would collapse because we're so used to the comforts, and we wouldn't work together. And that makes me sad.
Yeah. And I think part of it is like, the people who would work together, I think would learn very quickly to be so wary of everybody else that it's like, it would be so hard to build trust between people after that point.
Right.
And
you would end up being like Kirsten. You would end up having to kill people and not loving that side of yourself, but knowing that that's the only way that you can protect yourself.
Exactly. And like, you see it at like the airport and the Museum of Civilization, like those people do come together and like, they did manage to reform a civilization. You see it in like Jeevan's, where Jeevan ends up.
Right.
They managed to reform. Communities have reformed.
Right.
After 20 years. Like.
Right. I mean, in the traveling symphony is also a civilization. They're a nomad civilization, right? But they still are. They have a hierarchy. They have leaders. They've really given over to self so much so, and I put this in the notes, they don't even go by their names anymore.
Yes.
Right? They
I want to talk about. Let's talk about the Traveling Symphony, because I loved the stuff that you wrote in here for so like not going by their names anymore.
Right.
And what does that say about this time after the pandemic? Right. Because I hadn't really, it made sense to me that some of them wouldn't go by their names, but I didn't think about it. I was just like, oh yeah, that makes sense. But I wasn't like, I want to know what your thoughts are on that.
So I've been a part of teams, and I was also in marching band. So like, I can get the whole, that's the first trumpet kind of thing. Right. But for me, this was like a complete loss of identity. Like they completely abandoned who they were before. And some of them, like Kirsten, don't really remember who they were. And they have kids that are younger than her that were born after the pandemic. So they don't know who they are either. But it's a complete abandonment of that. It's we are this unit together. And that's what you do. You go by that and you represent us as a whole. And once someone dies within their group, they don't replace them. You don't go from second to first. You still be second. The first is just gone. And I think that was just a really interesting choice. Kirsten always goes by Kirsten, but it seems like to me like the actors go by their names. It's the musicians that don't.
Yeah.
Which is a weird choice because the actors play different characters. Like they are no longer themselves.
Yeah. And I wonder if that's it. If it's because like they play so many different characters that it's like you have to go by your name because you're not stuck in one role.
Right.
But that is interesting. I hadn't thought about that.
But can we talk about Shakespeare for a minute? Because that's what they do. They do Shakespeare. And like, listen, I've literally been to Shakespeare's birthplace. I love Shakespeare. Former English teacher. I'm going to love Shakespeare, right? Hamlet is my favorite play ever. Like, hands down, it's my favorite. I do not get why that would be the thing that everyone would latch on to. I know that she's drawing the parallel between, like, you know, his civilization survived another pandemic. But to me, that is not the thing that people that survived a pandemic would latch onto. It's also not very relatable. Like Shakespeare it's very elitist. Like when it was written for the common man, right? He invented all sorts of words and all sorts of language, and he really made it for the people who were standing, not the people who are up in the boxes. But it's elitist today. So I'm just shocked that that's the thing that everyone would be related to. Like that they would like that.
Yeah, I that is interesting because it is almost like it would be like if the world, there was a pandemic, the world collapsed. The books that we decided to keep were all the classics. Like we kept all the Charles Dickens. It's like, no, man.
No,
I'm saving this book. Like, I'm not saving. Charles Dickens can go into the river. Like, he can be kindling for the fire. I don't care.
Listen, the Great American Read that PBS did, one of the top 10 books that was voted was 50 Shades of Grey. So people are not saving Dickens. That's not happening.
No. And, like, I can see it. And this is, if any of my theater kid friends ever listen to this, I apologize. But I think this may have been theater kid bias because it's like if the actors are the ones saving the scripts, I can imagine some of them being like, we have to save the Shakespeare. Like, and it could have been a thing like, and this is me probably giving more leeway to the book than I should, but like it could have been a thing where they were like, we're going to perform Shakespeare because this is something that people know. Like not only will our actors know it and our musicians probably like can pretty easily come up with some music for it, but like people that remember the before times will be comforted by something that's so ubiquitous, sort of. So,
but really, and I know it was really, people know Hamilton better than they know Shakespeare.
Exactly. It's like, why aren't you doing Hamilton? Like, maybe the script,
maybe
like
a little Wicked in there.
Scripts were easier. I don't know, but like I also like, I'm like, I don't care about Shakespeare. Literally, but one thing I did, and you're right, like it's for the parallels, it's for the ideas of like Shakespeare was also like during
I think it also draws on the fact that she was in a Shakespearean play with Arthur Leander when he died. Like I think it's that too, but I don't believe her. I don't believe her that that's the thing that people would latch onto because Kirsten literally says that they tried other things, but they didn't work. That Shakespeare was the crowd pleaser, and I'm like, nah, I don't believe that. No,
I don't know. Did you try the Book of Mormon? Because that's pretty funny.
Did you try literally anything else?
Literally anything else.
Literally anything else.
Like so one thing I wrote in here about Shakespeare, near the end of the book, one of the characters of the Traveling Symphony starts, I think it's the clarinet. She starts trying to write her own play because she says that Shakespeare is insufficient, which it kind of parallels the way that they say that like survival is insufficient, but like their repertoire needs more. The clarinet was going to write her own play. So it's about like, we can't, even now, today, we can't just depend on our classics for our morals and our stories and our beliefs about things. Like we need to continue creating into the future. And like with the book is about how like the past is gone. And there are some people who will do anything to get the past back. And they can't let go of their memories. And people who are sad about it but are still moving forward. And then the young people who don't remember the past, their memories they only go forward.
Right.
And so like, I really love this idea of like, we can't only rely on our past and our memories. Mm-hmm. We have to keep moving forward. We have to keep creating new things.
Yeah, I think what you just said reminded me of the very beginning of this book. And if I can find the quote, I'm just going to read it. And maybe I have it marked. So I was reading your questions and being like, well, now I have to take notes like I'm an English major again. So this is where Jeevan finds out that this is going to be a bad thing. So Jeevan was crushed by a sudden certainty that this was it, that this illness Hua was describing was going to be the divide between a before and an after, a line drawn through his life. And I feel like that doesn't just describe this book. It doesn't just describe the pandemic in this book. It doesn't just describe COVID. It describes so many points in our lives, like 9/11, for example. I was in college when that happened and watched the towers come down live on TV. And it was life-changing for me. It was a line. This is something different from here on. Yeah. And you get kids in this book like Kirsten who can't remember the before, but you also have kids who are born after who literally don't even know that anything else existed. And I think that was a really interesting, like, look at it. Like, this is the moment. This is the life-changing moment.
Yeah, for sure.
This book is just so deep. It's so good.
It's so deep. It's so good.
It's so good.
Goodness, I'm like, oh God, which of my questions do I want to get to first?
I don't know.
There's so much that I want to. So, okay. This book has a lot of different point of view characters. We have Kirsten, Jeevan, Arthur, Miranda, Clark, maybe some random ones thrown in there.
Never the Prophet, though, which was a really good choice.
Never the Prophet. I really liked that. I liked that she did not give him... We never got into his head, which I liked. Mm-hmm. Was there one point of view that affected you more than the others?
I actually really liked Miranda's story a lot. Mm-hmm. I liked that it weaved together from like when she was young until she was not really even that old. She was only in her 50s when the pandemic hit and she died. But I really liked her story. And even though Jeevan wasn't as connected to like the final story, he was woven into so much of her story. And so like I liked that storyline a lot. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I know we're all supposed to follow Kirsten. Like she's kind of like the big deal, right? Mm-hmm. But I don't know. I kind of liked Miranda's story a lot.
Yeah. I think Kirsten has kind of that, like, the main character syndrome, which is not a bad thing. I think it's a thing that happens in a lot of stories because you have to have this character that is kind of the center post. Mm-hmm. And it's kind of like, I don't like or dislike you. I see your function in the story.
Right.
And it's more about a function than it is about liking or disliking them.
Right.
I loved Miranda's. I loved Jeevan's. I think the one that affected me the most was Clark's. Mm-hmm. Because he starts off like in this job that does he enjoy it? It doesn't really seem like it.
It doesn't seem like the thing that he wanted to do.
No, it seemed like kind of the thing that life herded him into. Mm-hmm. And he talks about like the clients that he sees and how they are like, I believe the term was high functioning sleepwalkers. Mm-hmm. And like, he starts to wonder if he is one of them. Like, have I just kind of given up looking at the world and seeing what I want and how I feel just to get through life?
Yeah.
And as he goes through, you know, he gets stuck at the airport. We see those early days from his point of view in the Severn City airport.
Right.
Like, interacting with all these people. And he's kind of almost just a view piece for how everybody else is reacting to it. Mm-hmm. And, like, you see the girl who has the depression and anxiety medication who just walks out of the airport and doesn't come back. That scared me too. That freaked me out when I first read it.
Yes.
Because it's like, yeah, what would you do?
Medication? Yeah.
Me too. Yeah. Also, another interesting point to talk about is how she goes about showing like disability in this book and how that would affect you if this happened.
Right.
Oh,
that's a good point.
I know. I like need to write that down. But like he he thinks about the plane. He kind of feels like the one who is the binding agent for everybody who stays at the airport, because he's the one who starts the Museum of Civilization. Right. And, like, he sees the beauty in memories and in showing people how the world was before, but he's also not so attached to the past that he wants to return. I mean, I think everybody would rather go back, but he's like, well, we can't. So we can look at the beauty of what was, and we can remember, and we can tell people these miracles that humanity performed. Right. But we still have to deal with the world that we live in now and do the best that we can.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's like a whole, like when his chapter starts with him getting on the plane, it's like basically by some miracle, he doesn't, he's in a cab that the cabbie's not infected. He goes on a plane that's no one's infected. He somehow avoided everyone in the airport in New York City who was infected. He basically is a freaking miracle. Yes. And I think it changes him. And so as you were talking, I was thinking about the fact that I feel like you could call each of these characters an anchor point, but you'd have to unweave the story, right? Yes. This story could be a collection of short stories of each of them instead of being woven together like this. And when I was reading this again, I thought Miranda died much sooner in the novel. Like I remember her dying, that she's looking out at the ships and that's the way that she goes. But I was thinking that happened like at the beginning of the book, and it's more than 50% into the book when you actually get her death, which is crazy because at that point in time, you're so much into the 20 years later that you're like, how is someone still dying of this pandemic? Like everybody else is gone already, but I feel like you could do that. You could unweave the story and each of them is an anchor point. And because they're woven together, then the anchor point ends up being Arthur Leander, who doesn't survive to even see the pandemic.
He doesn't even, that's the thing. The first time I read this, I thought he was like one of the first victims of the flu. He just has a heart attack.
He has a heart attack. Like he doesn't even know that the flu exists. He dies before that.
He dies right before it. Like,
which is crazy.
And then they talk about how like everybody in the theater, basically everybody else who was in it, like, dies hours later, 2 weeks later. Yeah. It's like, it's
and that's
so well done.
That is written to be like one sentence. The 4 people there, one dies in 3 days, one dies. Like it's written as one sentence. Like it's just off the cuff, like no big deal. And you're just like, did she really just say that? Did she just tell us that all these people that were sitting here died of this flu within weeks?
Yeah.
And she just did it so cavalierly. And then you're like, the expectations for this book, like from that point on, like it's so good.
It's so good. So now that I'm thinking about it, like before I forget, the part about like how it would be to have a disability if something like this happened. And like, obviously COVID-19 was like very, very rough for everybody, but especially for people with disabilities. Right. And like, so in this book we have, Jeevan's brother, Frank, who is in a wheelchair, right? Because he was shot, I believe.
Yes, he was a photographer, a war photographer, and got shot.
A war photographer and got shot. And then we have the girl who's on like the depression medication. We have like, I mean, obviously in the post world, there's no like dental hygienics, so like Kirsten is like losing teeth,
right? She looks pretty shiny in the HBO series, though.
That's the other. I loved that she lost teeth in the book because it's like, real. It's real. You would not. There's nothing you can do if you lose teeth,
right?
In a post-apocalypse.
Right.
So Jeevan's brother Frank commits suicide because he doesn't want to be a burden, and I think to me it also read as like he knows that it's going to be even harder for him. Because there's no accessibility in the post end of the world. It's it would be like I was just like but
and I think about, so my oldest son is autistic and he's twice exceptional. He's autistic and he's gifted and he's all kinds of brilliant, but he struggled with the pandemic because school was canceled, and that was his normalcy. And then we went on a hybrid schedule, and he went back and forth. And that kind of irregularity is just not good for him. Like, he needs some stability in a schedule. And then when they started masking at school, his autism, he has hyperfixations with chewing on things. And so he was just chewing on his masks all day. And so it was completely unsanitary. We were like sending like literally packs of disposable masks with him daily because he would just eat them. Yeah. And so that was not healthy. And so I think about like that, somebody who's autistic, what would you do? Like, how would I be able to convince him that we just have to walk, that we have to just go somewhere, that we just can't be here, that the comforts that you know are just not available to you? Yeah. Because there's no way that I could explain that to him. There's just none. Yeah. Because I couldn't explain COVID to him, and that wasn't even nearly what this was, you know? Yeah. Exactly. I couldn't explain COVID to myself as a person with an anxiety disorder. I was just like, okay, we're all going to die now. So, yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
There we go.
What do you do? Like, and then the girl with the medication, it's like you see her going around the airport, like asking anybody if they have any. And it's like she's trying. And you know, as a reader, like, even if she finds some now, that's not going to last forever. Yeah. And there's nothing you can do. If you are anybody who has to take a medication, you're done.
You're done.
That's it.
That was the other thing that Katie said, and I forgot to mention, but she mentioned specifically people that take insulin and things like that, because they wouldn't have access to that. They would die pretty quickly, even if they survived the flu. Because who would make the medicine? I was like, I asked her, like, do the hospitals like have to take the people, knowing that this is like a deadly pandemic, and then they, as the hospital staff, will also die? And she was like, they can technically turn them away if it's like the hospital's full and we are overrun and we can't, which is part of the reason why we needed to stay home during COVID. So we didn't overrun the hospitals.
Right.
But she said that the hospital personnel would also have the choice to stay or not. And most of them, because given the nature of what they do for a living, that they save lives, they would stay and then they would die, because that's what was happening. Right. Yeah. And we did lose during COVID. We did lose a lot of people in the medical profession because they were caring for their patients and got sick. So, I mean, like, I feel like someone needs to, like, I don't know, maybe there's an interview with her now post pandemic to see, like, how did you, like, you know, how do you feel the pandemic existed versus what you wrote? Yes. But I feel like HBO picked up the book specifically because we went through a pandemic, and then they just didn't do a good job with it.
Yeah, that's, and it's like, oh, I don't feel like you did this, you didn't do it for the right reasons. Like, you know, whatever you want to say about it. But like, yeah, I agree.
You're editing our document right now.
I am highlighting. I'm turning some of the questions black so that I can tell which questions we still haven't talked about, because like, there are so many things.
Oh, I know. I have a note in here that on page 236, someone says it's unprecedented, and I just thought that was like so crazy, because that's what kept being said during COVID, right? It's unprecedented.
It's unprecedented. You're right. I was going to ask you about that too.
Like, that they say it.
It's unprecedented. And it's like, every single time that the numbers would go up during COVID, you would see a newscaster saying unprecedented numbers. It's like, after a couple of weeks, it's like, I think it's precedented now. I think we know. We're good. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh my God. So, okay. I'm backtracking a little bit
to fine.
Clark and the high functioning sleepwalkers.
Oh yeah, I distracted you. I'm sorry.
No. That's fine. Like, I am good to go whichever way. Do you agree with this idea of high functioning sleepwalkers?
Yeah.
So there are a lot of people who go throughout their days never really feeling deeply or pursuing their joys. And have you ever found yourself in that position?
Oh yeah, 100%. So I feel like I was like that when I was teaching the first time around. So I was an English teacher before I got my master's degree. And I feel like I just went through the motions. That was just like, get up, take a shower, go to work, do the things. And I mean, I definitely was battling depression at the time, so that was part of the problem.
Yes.
But I think that as a society, like, we do have people that this is just what they do. They go through the motions, they do the things, and there's no real, like, change in their behavior or pattern. And sometimes you just need to be challenged. Like, you need it.
Yes.
And yeah, So how about you?
Same. So I definitely went through a period of this when I was at my old, like, my full-time job.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it is that thing of, like, which especially happened, I mean, we saw it happen with tons of people during COVID, is like when something huge happens
Mm-hmm.
and that life-changing event does happen, which
Mm-hmm.
for me was going into a period of, like, serious clinical depression,
Mm-hmm.
and then eventually getting medicated and coming out of it. It was
Right.
like after that, it's like you have perspective
Right.
on your life now, and you see things so differently. And I think after that was when I really started thinking, like, I was already published by that point. Like,
Mm-hmm.
3 of my books were out. And I was just like, I don't want to, like, I want to write. I want that to be what I do.
Mm-hmm.
I want to pursue things that interest me. I want to pursue,
Mm-hmm.
like, hobbies. I still have to make money. I understand that, but, like, I don't want to waste my time
Yeah.
just going through the motions of something that I don't want to do.
Right.
So then I quit that job, and I think I just started really spending more time with myself and looking and being, like, aware of the world around me. And I think that happened with COVID a lot too, is you see all these people, like, quitting their jobs, staying home more, like all the like people making bread and stuff. It's like they COVID shook them up and made them like stop and think about what they care about and what's important. Mm-hmm. And they were like, oh, I'm spending more time with my family. I'm pursuing things that I've always wanted to do. I'm trying something different. Like, I feel like it's like, maybe it's like it feels like you're using your brain again. It feels like you are aware and present. And like, that's such a like revelation when it happens to you.
Mm-hmm.
And I think even now, like, I've gone back into some states where I feel like I'm sleepwalking through my days, but I think I'm better able to, like, recognize it now and say, like, hold on, you're doing that thing where you slip away, where you stop being aware, which is okay in, like, very small amounts, but, like, let's get up, let's drink some water, let's go for a walk, and, like, get into something, like, use your brain. Let's go. Let's start.
Yeah, for me, it's when I realize that I'm out of clean underwear and I probably need to do the motherfucking laundry. It's like, girl, you need to pull yourself up and do the fucking laundry.
It is, you got to do something.
That's gotta do something.
I this morning, before we started recording this, I was sitting on the couch playing a new video game that I just got. Mm-hmm. And, like, it's one of those games that you can just kind of get lost in and spend, like, hours playing. Yeah. And I was like, at a certain point, I realized that I was starting to get a headache because I hadn't had any water in too long and I'd been sitting in the same position. And I was like, ooh, you got to move, buddy.
Got to fix that.
You got to get up and do something else.
Yeah.
Like,
I was one of those people that changed careers during the pandemic as well.
Oh, nice.
So my library went through a restructure, to, because we were not people not coming in the building. And so I didn't lose my job, but they eliminated my position. So I got moved into a different department and I just really didn't want to do that job. And I really loved the library system where I was working, but I had been working from home at that point for probably about 3 months and had just loved being home with my kids. And being home with my husband, who's a stay-at-home dad. So, like, it really was the 4 of us, like, all day, every day. And we get along really well. It's not always perfect. Like, sometimes I'm like, get the fuck away from me. Mommy's going to read now. But we had so much fun together. And so I went back to teaching. Like, I became a school librarian for 2 years because I was like, I'm going to have more time with my kids. It ended up that being a school librarian was just not it for me. And so I was not happy doing that, even with the extra time with my family. So now I'm back in public libraries, but that was what made the change. It was like, I'm home with them and I really love this. And what I'm doing now is just prioritizing them because I really didn't do that with my previous library. And so my rule is I work 40 hours. That's what you pay me for. Occasionally I have to stay over a few minutes here and there. That's fine. But I'm not working 50 or 60 hour weeks. That's just not happening. That's not happening.
Exactly. Exactly.
And I'm like one of the only people in my library that have young kids. Like my kids are 9 and 6. Like they're little. Like my 6-year-old, you know, he really knows is pandemic. He's a first grader this year. So
yeah, gosh.
Yeah. So anyway, yeah, they keep, you know, talking about how they need to catch all the kids up, right? And my son's one of the people that like most of his class did not go to preschool, which is like not something that happens anymore. Yeah. He went to preschool, but that doesn't really happen anymore, and a lot of them didn't.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Gosh. I am very curious to see, like, as this younger generation grows up, like this generation that kind of was either born during COVID or I don't think for the ones that were born during COVID, I don't think it'll be that different, but like the kids who had that, like, you're not in school anymore, you're not seeing your friends, like during these really formative years, like I'm interested to see how they turn out and how they view the world, and like what's their sense of humor going to be like, and what's, because like millennial and like Gen Z sense of humor is already like shit posting and stuff. So it's like, what is it going to be like for kids that had to go through the pandemic, you know?
Well, and like right now, raising 2 kids that went through the pandemic, like one being young, like my youngest, Sam, and then my oldest being autistic, and, you know, like he wanted to go to school because of the, you know, that was normal for him, but the not making friends part of it, like he didn't care. Like he doesn't have very good social skills. So he was like fine with not having socialization. And I actually went to the school board and spoke and was like, I really need you to reopen schools. Not because it's not because I don't care. Like it's not that at all. There are kids like my son who are really lacking social skills, and they're not going to get them, like at all.
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
This is something that's really a problem for him.
Yes.
So fortunately, well, I'd like to say that schools are saying things like, we're going to change the standards to meet the current class, but no, they're not doing that. They're just saying that all the kids are behind and we're going to work on catching them up. The standards were created by people who weren't teachers anyway. Okay, I got to get off that.
Right, exactly.
I got to get off
the I know a bunch of teachers, and it's been chaos. So like, but something that you said made me think of something else in this book, which was, talking about like socialization skills and how we socialize, and like I occasionally, like, okay, so first of all, I have seen so many stories, movies, books, whatever, where there's like a zombie apocalypse or a big thing where it's a symbol or a metaphor for like, oh, they're just staring at their phones all day. They're like zombies. Oh, they're not real people. And there was a part in this book where they talk about how, like, phones are like a miracle. And when you're staring at your phone, you're not disconnected. You are more connected than anybody has ever been in the history of humanity.
Right.
And I really liked that. I liked that she didn't take this, like,
technology is the problem.
Technology is the devil. It's like, no, technology is a miracle, and it can be used for bad purposes, and it can do bad things to us, but like, it is not evil, and it did not cause these problems. And like, when we don't have it anymore, look at, like, we can't even keep, like, we can't keep track of each other. We can't keep, you know,
they literally don't know if there's anyone outside of the US. They literally don't know.
They don't know. And so like, there's that aspect of it, like how technology connects us and makes us able to communicate. But then also the idea of like, kids now, like, there are sometimes I see people on the internet who it's like, you have spent too much time on the internet, like, because when you interact with them in real life, they don't know how to handle. They don't know how to handle like face-to-face interaction, which is just from a lack of experience. And it's like, you know, the social cues on the internet are different from the social cues face-to-face.
Sure.
And like I'm autistic, and like, when I was growing up, socialization was very hard for me, and I had to learn all the scripts, and you know, the internet was generally easier to learn because it was more cut and dried, kind of, and you don't have to read body language, you read text. And so, like, the idea, and, like, I've worked in customer service, so I feel like I'm very good at it now. You have to get very good. But, like, the idea of the only way you interact with people in this future is face-to-face, and you really have to know how to read body language. You have to be able to read in between the lines.
Right.
Like, is this person wary of me? Is this person
safe?
Are they, like, how do I come off to them? And so, like, that makes me wonder, like, who would have the skills to read other people and read those social situations the best? Because I almost feel like those would be the most valuable skills in that world. Like, some of the most valuable. Obviously, you need to know how to, like, find food and water and shelter. But it's like, when the downfall of civilization is other people, like, is the people themselves, it's like knowing how to bond with other people and be trustworthy and navigate other people's emotions and body language and all that stuff. It's
huge.
It's huge. And like, being online so much would really hinder people in being able to do that. Obviously, this is a fictional situation, so it's not like there are not situations now where people are dying because they're on the internet too much. But it just made me think about that kind of thing.
When what you said made me think of something that's not really related, but I did find it really interesting that she chose not to have famous people be like survivors.
Yes.
Right? So I guess technically Arthur Leander's ex-wife, I can't think of her name, the prophet's Elizabeth, she's technically famous and she survives. Although at some point she must die because she's no longer with them.
Yes.
But that isn't what happens here. It isn't like the famous and rich people got to be saved because they were famous and rich. It's not like the president somehow was saved and like is now leading the country again. It's literally lawless, feral community that's left. And I think that was just such an interesting choice because I don't believe that would be what happened. Like, I really feel like wealth, privilege, people affected by COVID the numbers were astronomically higher for people who lived in poverty because they don't have the same health care and they don't have the options to not work.
They don't have the same health care. They don't have the same options to not work. And in specifically in the book's case, with like a disease that moves so quickly, it's like the president of the United States would have been one of the first people to get quarantined.
Right.
Like, and then every high-ranking political figure would have been quarantined
elsewhere, not together.
Like, there were, like, in the early days of COVID, there were a ton of celebrities getting COVID. So I absolutely do think that the celebrities would die.
When Tom Hanks got sick, everyone was like, "Shit, this is real."
Yeah, exactly.
This is real.
Everybody was getting sick. Like, Trump got it, but it was like months after the fact. And so
it's like a year after COVID first.
Yeah. So it's like, I absolutely believe that, like, the people in power who would have had the knowledge of like quarantine now would have been more saved.
Right.
Because there really wasn't, like, in this book, there really wasn't like a medical help will save you. It was like, if you get it, you're dead.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I agree. Like, in a pandemic where there is some kind of medical help, most of the survivors will probably be the very rich and famous.
Yep. Yep. And so I thought it was a good choice that wasn't the case here because it's interesting. And yeah.
And I like the fact that, like you said, she did show it. Like, she had Elizabeth and Tyler there.
Yeah.
And it was like, they did survive, but it was like, your fame, it did nothing for them.
It did nothing.
Like, they
got
just became
to stay in the Sky High, whatever.
Sky Miles Lounge.
Yeah.
which was like they could stay pretty much wherever in the airport at that point because it was free range. Like,
they'll sleep in the massage chairs. Like, you could be anywhere.
It almost felt like because like it didn't seem like Elizabeth helped out that much with getting the airport habitable.
No, for sure.
It almost felt like all that being famous did for her was give her like a lack of reason to do anything.
Oh yeah.
And so she just kind of, and it's like Tyler played his Nintendo console until it died.
Right.
And then he just cried. And then he walked around reading the Bible. Like,
right. Although that probably would be my kids. Their tablets would die and then they would cry.
It would have been me too. Like,
it's over now. I also think when we talk about like that loss of technology, there's a scene in this book where they send a search party out from the airport just to see if there are any survivors, and they find somebody who cries because he thought he was the only one, right? So he just cries at seeing another person. And like, I feel like that would be reality too, right? Yeah, you would just be it'd be like, oh my God, there are other people. I'm not alone.
Like, I'm not alone. Right. And you would just be so relieved that you weren't alone.
Right.
That, you know.
Because your initial instinct would be survival. And then after that, it would be like, okay, but who else survived? Right.
Yeah.
Well, I did have another question on here if you wanted to talk about NaNoWriMo. Did you want to talk about that? A little bit?
Yes, let's.
And I mean, we're over time already, but
I think we covered like everything I had, really. Yeah. So
we're over time, but like this is a great conversation. I love getting to chat with you. It's just so fun. It's so fun.
I love coming on. Molly, if you're listening, I'm so sad you're not here.
I know.
You need to come back.
I know. She's like so bummed too because she's a writer and she just started a new book that she's doing a lot of world building, and she's like drawing maps and things, and like there's just so much going into it, and I'm just like I just really want you to finish the romance novel that you sent me the first 5 pages of, because I can't with you changing topics again.
Yep.
That's the problem with being the writer's friend, right?
Yes. I have had friends who are like, so when are you going to write that Now Entering Adamsville sequel? And I'm sitting there like, when are you going to pay me for it?
Right. I'll take the money, please.
Yeah.
So do you plan to to write for NaNoWriMo this month? Do you have so it's November now, so
it is November now.
Are you participating?
So yes. And as of like October 30th, I was like, I'm going to do it.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to get it done. I have an outline for a book. I'm very excited about it. And then like November 1st hit, and my, I was talking to my agent, and she was telling me about like some opportunities we have that I need to like write pitches for and write a proposal for. And I was like, well, Nano's going to wait because I have to I have to work on this proposal. And I did that thing where I write like, I was like, oh, I have to rewrite these first 3 chapters, wrote 7,000 words of it. And I was like, I like the original draft better. So it took me all this week to get that material together for her. And I have not had a chance yet to write a single word on this Nano book. I have the first chapter done, but I wrote that at like the beginning of October. So,
well, you're going to get zero judgment from me because I'm not a writer. So writers listening might be like, what are you doing? But I'm like, that sounds like you were doing your job. You had things you had to write that were for your publishers.
I did write 7,000 words. So, but like for the writers listening, I have participated in NaNoWriMo probably since 2012, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Or 2014, I don't know, somewhere in there, since high school. Maybe it was 2010 then. Anyway, since high school. I know. Earlier, when you said where you were when the 2 towers fell,
yeah,
I was
old, I know.
I was like, I was in first grade.
Yeah. I could have been your teacher. Like when I was teaching the first time around, my first class was the class of 2005. So
yeah. I was in elementary school. So anyway, for the writers out there, like I've done NaNoWriMo for a long time, and like in earlier years, it was like I could get 2 books done in a month. Like
that's incredible.
I would just crank this stuff out, and it was because like I was in high school and in college, and like I didn't have a lot of other responsibilities, and I didn't have like as much on my mind as I do now.
Right.
And like I just want the writers to know that like everybody, if you are somebody who struggles with doing NaNoWriMo and you struggle with getting the words out or getting it all done, or like you're so busy during the month, like that's okay. Like the point of NaNoWriMo is to help you. It is not to put stress on you to like, if I don't complete this, I'm a failure. It is to help you try to get
that's for your fans to do.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. So it's like people, you know, sometimes it's like, oh, can you tell us about what you're working on? And it's like, I could. Will I? No, because then you don't want it. And it's like,
I want the piano story. Like I want
the piano story I told people about because I had already had a finished draft. So I was like, could still have like it's not that big of a deal. This one that I'm writing right now for Nano, like I'm super excited about it. I've told my boyfriend about it. I've told some of my family members about it, but it's like, I'm not putting that out online because like, I don't want anybody to want it and then be disappointed when it never gets picked up or it doesn't, you know, it doesn't end up being what they want or whatever. So like Nano, yes, I'm definitely doing it. Gonna try to do it.
Yeah.
Gotta finish that artwork for the inside of Grey Mist Fair first, but I have the Scrivener file pulled up right now. I'm gonna get some words written today.
Nice.
We're gonna do our best.
I think most people don't realize that authors don't necessarily write. They write a whole book and then it's published, and then they write a whole book and then it's published. Like most writers do not write like that. They are working on pieces and parts all the time. Now, there are some authors that is what they do. They only focus on one book at a time because that's what their brain can handle. That's the capacity. But they've written books in between their published books. Like John Green has one of his videos. He talked about how he wrote an entire book in between. Can't think of which one came. Paper Towns maybe came before before The Fault in Our Stars. He wrote an entire book in the middle of there. And he just decided it wasn't good and wasn't going to publish it. And so, like, that's crazy to me. There's, like, a whole John Green book out there somewhere that is never going to come to fruition because it just wasn't it. Which I would still read it.
Like, there are so many books of mine, like, Cats and Yammer even, I wrote that back in 2015, I think, for NaNoWriMo, actually. It did not see the light of day until this year. Like, we even pitched it to my editor years ago, and she said no at the time, and because it wasn't right. And then we came back to it, and she said yes, and then it got published. So, like, I have so many books that I've written that either got shelved for one reason or another, or just haven't been pitched yet, haven't been published. I've rewritten things. I have, like, some of the pitches that I did for this thing that I had to do this week. One of them was for a book that I wrote years ago that I was like, I don't know about this. This isn't right. I don't think anybody will buy this. Like, we'll put it away. And then it's like, oh, maybe now is the time. Let's put this out now. So yeah, it's like authors don't always write linearly. Like, if you are contracted for several books, you'd be like, yeah, okay, I got to write this one.
I've
got books from all kinds of different, you know, points in my life. Where it's like, I don't even, if I wrote that same book now, it wouldn't be that book.
And you write standalones, so it's different than like being a series. Like, you're not necessarily expected for a book to come out every year. So you know, whereas like if you're writing a series, they want that sequel within a year and a half, you know, kind of thing.
Exactly.
And that's different when you're doing standalones. And most authors, when they are writing standalone novels, they do not put a book out every year. You know, there are people like James Patterson that have books coming out all the time, but people don't necessarily know that he doesn't write those books. Most of them are ghostwritten, and they just get his name put on them. And I really hate how much shelf space he takes up in libraries. Like, he's literally in every department. It's so annoying. It's every department. But like, that's not normal. So like, if you are a writer, which I'm not, I have written like a quarter of a novel that was probably good, but also like, that's not me. I like reading books. I like talking to people about books, writing. There was a time I wanted to be a writer. It's not this time. But like, the point is, don't quit. Like, if you enjoy writing, it doesn't necessarily need to even be for publication. So earlier this season, actually in October, Chessie, we had on an independent author who has wrapped up her series. Her final book in her series came out this week, actually. And she wrote 4 books in this series that she's published independently. And she's currently writing a book that she is seeking to publish traditionally. And that was one of the things that she was saying, that it was like, just don't give up, like, keep going, because she was doing it for her. And I think there's value in that. Yeah,
exactly. Like, it's so funny because it's like, so obviously, so in Eliza and Her Monsters, she draws Monstrous Sea, which is the book that I've been working on since I was like 8 years old. And that book has been rejected so many times, not by like editors. It's never gotten to the editor level, but like by agents, by different people. Like, the number of times it has changed is insane. And it's like, that is the one story that I'm like, this is it. Like, this is, to make it super dramatic, it's like, this is my magnum opus right here. And it's like, but there is nothing anybody could ever say that would make me give up on that story. There are other stories of mine that I'm like, this is great. And then a couple months later or whatever, I'm like, this is not good. And I put it away. That one, it's like, sometimes you have to have, you really have to have like that belief in yourself and the belief in the story that you're telling. To know that it is worthy of the time and effort that you're going to put into it. And the struggle that you're going to have getting it out.
Right. Well, Molly and I are still on pins and needles for Monstrous Sea to be published someday. We're here for that.
I feel it in my bones. Monstrous Sea now!
I want it now. It's just so, like, for those people who did not listen to the episode where Chessie was on in season 2, go back and listen to it. I'll put a link below. But you actually talk about how there is an illustration in Eliza that's from like early renditions, right? It was like, you were like 8 when that mech was drawn, right? Or
I know exactly what you're talking about. The picture is it is a picture of like a big like anime type mecha, and it has the head of a jackal. And I drew that picture in 6th grade.
Yeah, 6th grade. Okay.
And 6th grade, and I had it on the bus with me to school. And there was a boy on the bus who said that he didn't believe I had drawn it because girls can't draw.
Because girls can't
that
draw
well. Yes. And he threatened to tear it up. And he did not, thankfully. And I was like, this is going in Eliza because that is a part of Monstrous Sea. And I was like, I love that picture. It's still good. And I was like, I'm going to put that in there. So yeah, like, this is something that I have, like, I'm sure some people would call it like, oh, it's obsessive, it's whatever. It's like, I'm not obsessed with it. Like, it is not, the depths to which I go in Eliza with like her, like, anxious fixation on it is not mine. But I do love that story, and I do believe there is something good there. To be told, and I care about it so much that it's like, I'm not going to give up on it. So
well,
I think that's true of like,
I want to read it someday. I want to so bad. All right. Well, I think that's it. Did you have anything else?
I'm good. I love Station 11 so much. It is one of my top 5 favorite books of all time. Maybe top 3, because I don't even know if I have a top 5. But like,
I can give you like a top 10, but it always changes. But this one's on it.
It's like, it's in no particular order. It is just like the books that come to my mind first of anything, of like, that changed me. That changed the way I think about the world.
Like, I have a favorite book of all time, and then I just have other favorite books.
Yes. Yeah, that makes sense. Like, my favorite book of all time is The Hero and the Crown by Robin McKinley. Like,
mine is To Kill a Mockingbird by Harper Lee.
Nice.
I love it.
Nice.
Well, we'll have to have you come back on in season 4. Like, you just have to.
Yes.
Because
absolutely.
Katie wasn't here this week, and, you know, she's going to be sad. So
yes, I'm sad.
I know. She's a lot more fun than I am. I'm a little bit more fun than her.
You are plenty fun.
Well, thank you.
Don't lie to yourself.
All right. Well, so next week, hopefully Molly will be back. And we're going to be talking about this book, When You Get the Chance by Emma Lord. And this is a YA book. And it is as sugary, sweet, sparkly as the cover looks. I am listening to the audiobook right now, and I like the narrator a lot. And then we're going to finish November with this book, Before I Fall by Lauren Oliver, which is also YA. And this book is not even the first Lauren Oliver that I read, but I love her books. I've read 5 of them, and they're really good. So I'm really excited because Molly has not read this book. So I'm excited to share it with her. So that's really it. Chessie, thank you so much. You are a delight as always. I'm just so thankful for you.
Thank you for having me. I love coming on here. I can't wait to come back and talk about something else.
Yes. We could talk about Grey Mist
Fair.
We could talk about Grey Mist Fair.
Let's absolutely talk about Grey Mist Fair.
That. I love that idea. And it comes out in March, so we could definitely do that next season. Love that idea. All right, that's it. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you for joining us on Book Besties with special guest host, author Francesca Zappia. Don't forget to like and subscribe. The views discussed here are those of Molly, April, and Chessie, not those of anyone else. Today's book was Station 11 by Emily St. John Mandel. Your book besties are Molly Biggs and April Watkins, editing by Thomas Watkins, and music is Sleep Sweetly by Brigida. Don't forget to follow Book Besties on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, and YouTube. If you'd like to contact the Book Besties, please email us at bookbestiespod@gmail.com or visit our website, bookbestiespodcast.com.